Welcome again to another segment of the Grassy Knoll. We're recording this on October 25th, for play today, October 26th. With us today is Andrew Colvin. We've been doing a series called The Mothman's Photographer. I would believe this would be part 14. And with us from the great state of Washington, once again, is Andrew Colvin. And thanks for coming back, Andrew.
Thanks, Viz.
All right. Boy, that sounded like you didn't script that one.
Hey, Viz, did you know that there are 3 Navy destroyers off of Iran just there to help George Bush win the election?
What? Now?
I was going back to that previous thing where we have we're working in the yard and it's a conspiracy world, and anyway.
Okay. Are there really 3 out there?
Yeah.
All right. I know that some were supposed to be steaming there and all that other stuff, so whatever. It's going to happen sooner or later. Everybody knows it, and somehow nobody can stop it. So, enjoy your life while you got it, because once that begins, it's going to start another kind of clockwork going. All right. Where are we headed for on this show, Andrew?
Well, we're going to answer a couple of questions you have and from before, from any of the previous ones, and
okay.
I could go off on a Navy track real quick. Speaking of the Navy, the book is done, by the way. My book, which I had been calling Eye of the Garuda, is now The Mothman's Photographer.
Oh.
We changed the name at the last minute.
How clever. How clever. We'll make the other one the subtitle then or something.
Yeah, well, it just seemed to make sense. And so we did that and sent it off to the publisher. But before we did, I had to make a decision because there was one more of those strange glitches. The end of a line on one of the descriptions disappeared, and it was the description of this sugar grove facility you and I were talking about earlier before we started the show today.
Okay.
There I was describing how they grabbed the data from the AT&T station nearby, and that little piece of information came off somehow, and I decided to just let that go and not put it back in because of the time constraints. I wanted to get it done by this show, and let that go. Thinking, it's kind of implied in there anyway. When you see the book, I sent you the PDF, but I guess you didn't get it. There was another thing that happened. I sent you the book in PDF form, and you never got it. But you'll see that the message still comes across that they're doing something fishy there in terms of data mining on phone calls and so forth.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That reminds me. Well, listen. Go where you want to go. With this, because you just perked up my my memory cells. So if you want, are you going to go on that Navy track? I was going to go on the Navy track, but there was also an article about something just came out about 911 and the NSA. Yes. Which
is connected to of course, the Sugar Grove. And that there's a lot more of those kind of connections surfacing. Is that what you wanted to talk about?
Well, that's what you reminded me of, that you did send me. And I've also asked that gentleman, I hope he got the message through his blog, if he'd like to come on and talk about that, because as you said, it seems like some good information about Echelon.
Yeah. It reminded me of the underground base in Australia under the big rock there that Keel talked about in the old days, right when it was built.
Mm-hmm.
It reminded me of a Navy guy that was in my high school class who became a high-level Navy commander of some kind. When he comes to the reunions, he comes in with his full array of medals and everything, and everyone treats him with great respect. And then another guy that I went to grade school with who may have been affected by this phenomenon somehow, I think, because he was such a creative person, sort of didn't seem to have that built into his surroundings, but it manifested in his life. And he and I actually worked on a mural together in high school. he became a Delta Force commander.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and a really, can you imagine the things he's done? But I know deep down this is an extremely creative individual who's very honest, and he's a minister, and he's highly revered as well in a different way. Because the Navy guy was more of a, I don't know, I can't really speak to any of it. I didn't know him, but...
is he by any chance naval intelligence?
I don't know. I doubt it.
And if he was, you probably wouldn't know anyway.
Right. But it reminded me of another weird thing that's going on in the neighborhood.
Which neighborhood would this be?
My neighborhood here in Seattle. I don't know if I've talked about it at all, but similarly to West Virginia, where all of this stuff happened on the site of an old school that had burned down.
Mm-hmm.
My house, we actually own, our backyard used to have a school.
All right.
That is no longer there. I don't know what happened to the school, but it was probably an Indian school before that, because we live right smack dab in the middle of the oldest Indian community in the state.
We're talking about Native Americans.
Yeah.
All right. And is there any remnant of that schoolhouse there? I mean, is there?
I actually did. I dug some post holes and found some strange pottery shards and things. It might be red. It could be red old sewer pipe from. They used to make them out of the red tile. Might be that. I don't know, but it was very ground up in this small piece.
Okay.
And so, I've had 5 different psychics come to my house. As part of the documentary, I wanted to, explore people that are able to connect with the spirits and clear your house if you have to, and that kind of thing. And I kept coming up. They kept saying there's something going on here. So I kept getting a new psychic, and they all said the same thing. There's some vortex or some strange energy force out here in that backyard. And
starting to sound like poltergeist.
We had poltergeists at our previous house. We had an orange ball that somebody saw. We had a string of UFO lights that were strung together, looked like by some kind of wire.
Yeah, but they weren't hurling anything across the room, were they?
Above the house. No. We've had poltergeists here, though.
All right, and I was really referring to the movie Poltergeist because they find out that they're living on top of a cemetery.
Well, to get this, the director of Poltergeist was Toby Hooper, who I worked with on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Part 2.
This is getting a little too weird for me. To be honest with you, it's starting to get to me now.
And I don't know if I've mentioned the poltergeist we had here at the house or not either, but we did. And we figured out who it was. His previous owner had died. And we got him to, move along and so forth. But, you could smell tobacco. There were knobs on the doors were bent. Bangings, doors closing, walking. Anyway, we have this backyard and it could be that my great grandmother, who was the Blackfoot Indian, may have actually lived in Seattle. And at one time, and may have, if she had lived here, she might have even lived in our neighborhood. But the strange thing about this backyard is that after talking to several neighbors, we figured out that there's like a negative thing around it. There's been property battles from previous owners. There was someone felt double-crossed, like the yard was supposed to have gone to a neighbor. See, we're not on it's surrounded by 5 different houses. This it's kind of an unusual situation because we're at the end of a block, and we've got all these houses around this spot, and it's just this strange situation. I've never quite seen it, but we've got one neighbor down here who it seems to be their yard, and in fact that it was. In the old days, the neighbor had that property, and that was the like entry building for the school, and then in the back they had another building, and they've always used it and so forth. But then when we bought it, we found out, I guess even before we bought it, it had already been, given to our property or become part of ours. But there were some bad feelings about all that back in the day before we came along. And then a person with a Navy connection started kind of freaking out about a section of the property that is in the unimproved alley. There's a little slice that's owned by the city still. And so this is an area of confusion because it's a little more gray area.
That's like an easement then, right?
Yeah, it's an easement, but it's owned by the city, so the city actually has, you have to file everything through the city if you're making any kind of agreements about the usage, and no one's done that, so the city still controls it, and if you get the proper permit with the city, you can use it, a portion of it. But there's one person who seems to have become obsessed with it, with this alleyway, and they want the whole alleyway for themselves, and they actually fenced it off and took it for a while. And some neighbors said, well, we can't do that. And that was several years ago, and it's sort of just become an obsession with this person. And they have a Navy connection, they have a Microsoft connection, they have a Texas politics connection, they have a Procter & Gamble connection, and they're basically, it's a high-level spokesman of some kind for Microsoft. And they obviously have some kind of occult interest because there's these angel things in the windows of their house. And they had a dispute with their neighbor. The neighbor got sick and is dying now. It's kind of strange. But all this is over a little piece of land. Mm-hmm. And was there anything else to say about that?
Well, by the way...
this person from Microsoft, I actually went to Harvard, too, another connection, is accused someone in the neighborhood of being a terrorist over this little piece of land. So, and I just was blown away by that there are people willing now to use that against their neighbors over very mundane issues. I think it's a really sad comment on where Bush has taken us.
Well, yeah.
Anything else on that?
Oh, but by the way, when you're talking about this individual, Procter & Gamble, with the little angel thingies in the window, wasn't it Procter & Gamble that got slammed by some Christian groups for what they thought was indulging in some occult symbolism for their trademark?
Oh, I didn't know that.
I think
they're a straight up, Southern Ohio, Bush-connected company, no doubt about it. Just from what I know from my friends who knew the Bushes.
Well, this happened at a time that I was not thinking the way I was, and it got pretty much squelched, which comes as no surprise. But my memory serves, coming to think about it, it probably was a cult, and one of those things, obviously that gets swept underneath the table.
Yeah.
And we have a person on that came on last month. Is going to come on of all days, Halloween. And he's called Freeman, and he does a lot with corporate logos and this bit of propinquity, I would say. I don't use that word much, so with their logos and occult symbolism. So this comes as no surprise, and probably those folks who identified that were probably right back then. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to mention the other name change was our discussion group. We changed that to the Mothman Photographer on Yahoo, too. So if you're searching for Mothman Live, don't search for that. Search for Mothman Photographer.
All right. Can they also hit that from your website?
No, because you have to ask permission to join at Yahoo anyway. So. Yeah,
but I mean, you could still be redirected if they wanted to go to.
Oh, yeah. I guess I should do that.
Yeah, link it up and let people go through you and do what they have to, and that makes it easy for them to try to sign up. Are things any more settled down in that particular forum?
Oh, you mean? Well, there hasn't been much activity on my group, just because there's such an embargo, if you will, on the information that I'm giving. I mean, it's pretty total. I can't think of anybody on the major list that's advocating my research at all, and it never gets mentioned. And I think last time we talked about some of the different ways in which, we talked about the Bigfoot guy who tried to say that military conspiracy theorists weren't welcome in West Virginia. And he's from Maine, but yet he's always, trying to, I think, divide. There's efforts are made to divide the community, the Mothman community for sure. And there's been some more of that Wikipedia battle stuff. I think you had mentioned something about Sarah Jane Moore. Yeah, my Sarah Jane Moore, there was a reference to me in Sarah Jane Moore in her description on Wikipedia that they'd taken out the references to Manson.
Well, I was there.
Just took his name out and left the sentence the way it was before, so it didn't make sense. It was obvious that someone had taken the name out. And then there's someone who's introduced at the bottom new information discrediting or trying to argue that they didn't know each other, that Sarah Jane didn't know Manson. And it's this woman from L.A. who's like a book. And a lot of these people seem to have, book publishing connections. And did you check her website out at all?
No, I didn't. And it is ironic because I didn't want to do this particular article, but I have to do a whole bunch more research to do what I want to do. But there's times also when I have to confess, from doing the show and stuff and the weekly columns for now over 2 years, I get a little underneath it sometimes, and to do something that's a bit, I don't want to say offbeat, but let that serve as the term for what I'm about to say. So I thought about that wacky time when we had two unelected officials in the highest offices of the land and 2 botched assassination attempts, and of course all that is connected. So yeah, I went to Wikipedia and I saw where you were mentioned as what do they call you, A.J. Colvin or something?
A.B. Colvin.
A.B. Okay, whatever that, right? And let me ask you while I got you. I mean, I guess she refutes, or someone refutes the fact that you both lived on what, Woodward Street or something?
Right. Did they refute that? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think that's what you're saying too. You saw the same thing I did, and that is, I believe that it's like, well, no, I didn't live on that street, or I did, and I didn't know Manson, because all 3 of you lived on that street at one time, didn't you? Or at different times?
Well, it was before I was born.
Okay. Yeah, and that's the other thing that whacks me out about Moore. I mean, she was 45 when she tried to do this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, if your hormones haven't settled down by then, like, what is the problem?
Yeah, she and Manson were both FBI informants. No doubt about it.
Yeah, and I guess that puts them in the same age category as well, because Manson's turned 70 now, I think.
Yeah, they're only 5 years apart or something. 4 years or something like that. So it's conceivable that they were friends and did hold hands together in the local cartoon store or gas station, like the guy said. The guy that owned it said it on TV.
What, the old Shell station, was that?
Well, it was right next to the Sunoco.
Oh, the Sunoco, right.
Rockefeller owned gas station, right sharing the same parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
This was this pawn shop that had everything from cartoons to guns. And the kids would go in there to look at the cartoons. And, he said it right on TV, and he said they were, like close pals. So, there you go. And there's this woman who's claiming it's not true, who claims she's written 2 books or 1 book or a book that has changed, the title's changed, I don't know. But there's 2 different titles involved, and neither one of them is on Amazon. I don't see a book anywhere that you can buy. Any place to get this research.
What we're going to do is after the show's over, if you don't mind, I just want to ask you a couple of quick questions, because you just gave me an idea, but that for another time, okay? But anyway, what I found interesting about what I call the helter-skelter assassinations, or the assassination attempts, and that's going to be up on my website on the Z-Files probably Friday. That's going to appear in the paper Thursday. And another angle was brought to this these assassination attempts. And by the way, both of these women were in either real tightly or a bit peripherally with the Manson gang, right? I mean, Fromm was his squeeze, was she not?
Yeah.
All right, and Moore knew Fromm, is that correct?
Yeah.
All right. So, but what's interesting is, and it's part of a book called America Betrayed by Ron Joseph, in which he stated that there might have been more at stake, or at least he didn't say that Rockefeller wanted to ascend to the presidency, but that would have happened had Ford been killed. And of course, Fromm and Moore both blew the assassination attempts. One got a shot off, I guess, and wounded somebody 3 blocks away, and the other gun misfired. I guess that was Fromm's. but that Rockefeller would have had the presidency, and then that Daddy Bush would have been vice president. And we were postulating that, well, that would have made him a lot more of an electable candidate if he could have got into the vice presidency underneath Rockefeller, and had they won in '76 in the election that obviously Ford got stomped by Carter, that he might have been a more electable presidential candidate in '80, which he was not. Hence, that's the reason why Ronnie Reagan had to be the front man and was forced to take Bush on as a vice presidential running mate when he hated Bush. And of course, then we have the assassination that's also botched in March of 1980. And again, Bush can't ascend into the presidency, but obviously, and you may differ with this, but I mean, I believe when you find out who shot him, or the way he was shot, Reagan, that Bush knew and Ronnie got it as to who really was the president for those 8 years, and that was Bush. And then, of course, he had it officially and did his 4 years before Clinton took over. One of the double-headed hydra, the other being Bush. So, and they don't even try to veil the fact anymore. I don't think that there's this continuum between Bush, Clinton to Bush. You know what I mean?
Right.
So.
And then the shooter of Reagan was
Hinckley,
a friend of the Bushes, and worked for Rockefeller at Standard of Indiana. Neil Bush worked for Standard of Indiana.
Well, Neil, yeah.
The thing we mentioned about Nixon, to give so that people know how craven Bush was to get into the office. He started back when Nixon was. He was supposed to be Nixon's running mate in '68. That was the plan. And then Nixon tripped him up and chose
Spiro.
Yeah, or it may have been 72.
It had to be 72.
May have been, yeah. And that's when Bush wanted in and wasn't getting in. And so you have them choosing a Greek, which got sort of, I think, inflamed whatever is going on with the Gemstone file and the Greeks and the Kennedys and the Hughes assassination teams and all that stuff. That kicked in, and Nixon was dethroned. So anyway. Yeah,
and again, things didn't work out too well for, I guess, for Daddy Bush back in '72. And Nixon first of all, Nixon taped everything he did, which he convicted himself. He indicted and convicted himself. And secondly, he had a bad habit of talking ill about Israel. And it probably wasn't a good idea calling Dr. Death, Dr. Kissinger, a Jew boy.
Well, he was probably talked into doing it by someone who wanted to make sure they had the goods on him later.
Yeah, and I mean, as John Coleman writes in Conspirators' Hierarchy, that really was just a botched, 2-cent break-in and entry, and she never brought a president down. And of course, they played this thing up big time. The Washington Post lent its resources to it, and they worked on him. And I think Coleman says that Haig and Kissinger both worked on Nixon to get him all freaked out about it, and eventually he does step down. And of course, those two characters are also around when Ronnie Reagan's popped, and we remember the famous quote by Haig saying, "Now he's in charge." Jerk. Which he was not.
Yeah.
But of course, there was no conspiracy, and they knew that within an hour, which is kind of interesting. And they had their little meeting as if Ronnie was there.
And Haig was the Knights of Malta, and the Foley thing involves the involves Malta, in the sense that Foley was molested by a priest who's now living in Malta.
Is that what?
Probably some connection there to the Knights, or at least it's a correspondence.
Well, there's some membership stuff floating around about the Knights of Malta. You don't know how credible it is, but certainly that might be a possibility. I've had them in my possession. I didn't keep them, but it wouldn't surprise me. Obviously.
You know how political these assassination attempts are, regardless of whether it's president or somebody else. You can contrast that shooting you brought up in '97. We had a Jewish school that was shot up in L.A., which got some press, and yet on the anniversary, the 5th anniversary of 9/11, we had another right-wing terrorist go in and try to blow up an abortion clinic with his car. Now, And he did. I mean, he crashed in and everything, but it was not covered at all. Even though the AP put out a story, none of the newspapers or TV stations covered it at all. So you have a definite bias against terrorists who are on the side of the right-wing Christian base of Bush.
Yeah, which is...
And I think that's the trend you're going to see now that we have lost habeas corpus and we entered a police state. You're going to see attacks on progressives in that way. They're going to be indirect, deniable, and under the radar. But that's how it's going to go.
Well, that has to be watched to a certain extent. And of course, I think the elections are rigged anyway, especially on the federal level, exclusively on the federal level. So I don't know how much of an impact that'll be. It might prepare the country to vote the way they want them to vote. And that would be, you got to watch out. You don't get too much of a sympathy factor for, as you call them, progressives or, Democrats or whatever. But, also a couple of things here. One, you got to wonder about Eric Rudolph and all that he did and how he winds up getting caught so absolutely, I don't know, so ridiculously caught, after being up in the mountains and stuff, and he's like going through a garbage can and he gets caught in town. So you got to wonder if he was an MK Ultra candidate. Also, I want to let you know, too, that we had a woman on the show yesterday, Sandra Utley, who's the author of Dunblane Unburied, which is about the massacre of, it was 15 children in Dunblane, Scotland. And now we're finding out that wasn't, there was the lone gunman may not have been the only person involved, if you know what I mean. Also, we see the same situation in Port Arthur, and Andrew McGregor, a retired police force officer of 17 years in Australia, is coming on tomorrow to talk about a real bizarre situation in Port Arthur. And the reason I bring this up, Andrew, is that when all these things occur, they always go after the kids for the most part, though Port Arthur was not after the children. Columbine obviously was, Dunblane obviously was, and that was even more egregious because the kids were just, they were elementary school kids. So the point being is that whether it's a left or a right agenda, there's still the same control factor seems to be at work, and that is not only gun control, but also, you got to be safe, you got to be secure, and you get more draconian laws passed that will not make you more safe and secure. So now they're starting to find out that a lot of these mass murderings have a certain connectivity to it. If nothing else, the modus operandi. So, I understand what you're saying, but there may even be something bigger afoot here. And as we talked last time, there was an incident also in Los Angeles at I believe it was a Jewish school. So, at any rate, it's not going to end, and obviously the implication is more control over all of us, no matter where we might find ourselves, be it in the UK or Australia or in Washington State.
Do you want to? I've got a few errata and little things before we get into our list. You want to hit those now?
Yeah, do the errata by all means.
Okay, here's one. This year we had a couple of interesting crop circles. On June 9th, we had one in Wiltshire County in England that looks like a serpent, an intertwining serpent. And lights were seen flashing in the circle, like these anomalous intelligent lights that we've talked about so many times. And that's exactly what happened when the serpent Mound circle appeared in 2003, which I visited totally by chance. I found it. I didn't know about it. I didn't read about it anywhere. I just had an inkling that I needed to go to the Serpent Mound when I got to Point Pleasant to interview people at the festival. I was with Harriet. I said, "Let's go." I just said, "I got to go." We drove over. The crop circle was there, and it looks like an eyeball from the sky. And we found eyeball imagery back in Point Pleasant, and we also saw those three entities again. Or Harriet did in her room in the Low Hotel, which is a haunted hotel. Which if you watch tonight on TV. Sci-fi special that I talked about earlier, where they invited me to come, but the email got held up for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. That's on tonight.
Actually, it was on last night.
Oh, was it?
Well, only because we're actually talking Wednesday for Thursday. So it's coming on Wednesday night, right?
Oh, okay, yeah, you're right.
Right.
Yeah, and well, yeah.
So it was on last night.
Yeah, in there you have a scene where apparently, I think it'll be in there, where Boston Rob from Survivor gets scared by the ghosts that are in that hotel. I mean, and you can feel them when you're in there. But we found these connections to what was going on at the Mound back in Point Pleasant, and that mound, when it was being formed that night, people saw the globes of light around 2. And there's an article that Linda Howe put in her Earth Files site about, or 2 or 3 articles about it. Here's one. It was the one I kind of struck from the record earlier. It was the Donnie Darko reference. The director of it was called a terrorist recently, and it was at the same time that this lady, the neighbor, called some other neighbor a terrorist over the fence issue or the alley issue. And then I've also got a good explanation of how to interpret these kinds of correspondences from Eugenia Macer's story that I can talk about later. She describes it very nicely. She's very good with the words. Here's one. Oh, the red tincture. Lavinda talks about something called the red tincture in the occult lore. It relates to synchronicity, and it's talked about quite a bit in the Mothman story, at least symbolically, because the Mothman chased a bloodmobile at one point, and Keel found that the Mothman was attracted to, and also the Bigfoot was attracted to menstruating women. And then there's this odd symbolism with Bhopal, Union Carbide plant, where they had that ad from the 60s showing them pouring a red liquid over the Bhopal plant. The hand of God is pouring this red liquid. And the guy who did a lot of those ads, I don't know if he did that ad or not, but they used their famous Russian artist for some of their ads. Union Carbide did. Uh-huh. And he's judging from his work, from what I've seen, he had a grasp of the occult. And I don't think he did that ad, but he may have influenced the direction of the ads, indirectly somehow, by giving input of some kind. That caused Carbide to do this Hand of God, series where they show this Hand of God in various forms coming down and as if they are the Hand of God.
You also reminded me of something. I'm going to throw this out to you just because I don't want it to get lost. And I'll send you the image. But there is a liqueur, I guess, or a hard liquor. I don't know which it is. I have to go take a look. But I got an ad sent to me. There is also one of them that I guess cover the top of the bottle, the neck especially, with red wax, as if it were just poured over. Like it isn't like a really tight, neat thing. It's just poured over. Does this ring a bell with you at all? This whatever this liquor is. Okay.
Yeah, I've tasted it. I mean, I know. Yeah, I've had whatever that is.
All right. So you know what I'm talking about because I've not seen the bottle firsthand. I've seen it in an ad. But what was really strange was, prior to 9/11, one of the ads they had this red wax dripping all over the trade towers in downtown Manhattan.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I'm sure that's a coincidence. I don't know. But I'll send it to you, and we can talk about that as well. But, I mean, this whole bit about the red liquid, overflowing and stuff, I just wanted you to know that mark occurred. Whether it's connected or not, I don't know. One other thing, Andrew, you talked about the eyeball imagery. Are we looking at basically something like the Eye of Horus, CBS logo,
Yeah.
All-seeing eye?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I won't sleep tonight.
Another little tidbit: my wife has joined a something called the kettlebell. There's a fad. It's sort of a fad workout thing called the kettlebell. It's not a fad, but it's hardcore, like Russian based thing where you swing these balls of iron, basically.
Sounds Russian to me.
Yeah, and she went to this. To the certification and everything, and got her certification. But the logo of this group it's called RKC, Russian Kettlebell Group, something, Russian Kettlebell something.
Okay.
And it's a Garuda. It's a double-headed Garuda.
What is the double-headed Garuda? Their logo?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's their logo, yeah.
Can we find it any place?
Say what?
Can we find that anywhere if we wanted to look at it?
Yeah, I'm sure if you go into Russian kettlebells, you'll find it. There's not many people doing it.
And this is kettle, like Kettle.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my wife, occasionally, she's starting to have more psychic things happen. She saw a dead guy recently who had died like 20 years ago. She saw him in Seattle on the equinox. Or she saw a guy that looked like a dead guy that she had known from school, and she called the guy's brother, who's still alive, and said, "I thought I saw your brother, your dead brother, and on such and such day at such and such time," and that was when he had died, 20 years before. And this happened in the Duwamish, what used to be an old Duwamish Indian village down in the valley where Boeing has a lot of its secret radar facilities. They have an enormous tank plane that has, it just looks like a whale, one of those whale planes, and they outfit them with radar here in Seattle. Goes right near there. Salamander. I talked about the salamander symbolism, the Garuda. We had the guy that my friend who was the Mothman contactee was totally into salamanders, and he had. One day we caught like 50 of them next to his house, which is kind of unusual.
And where was this at?
They're not even found today. They're dying out. It's in West Virginia at the shrine.
Well, they all moved to Florida, let me tell you that.
Oh, really? Good. Glad to see they're still kicking. And one thing I didn't mention about the Kentucky whiskey angle with, they use the whiskey to make the fake rubber at Carbide, which they shared with IG Farben. They shared the patent with IG Farben. Mm-hmm. And by the way, Lind, the subdivision of Carbide, is a German company. The whiskey was from Kentucky, therefore that forges a connection early on between these mobsters in Kentucky and Union Carbide.
I have one thing to bring up, if I could.
Yeah.
We have a listener who lives in Haymarket. I guess that's West Virginia, where there apparently was a sighting. He wanted to know if there was more information about it, and you indicated that it happened in 1968, to the best of your knowledge. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right. Now,
I think it might have been Pursuit magazine, which Keel edited, that I saw it in, or I may have seen it in one of his more obscure books. Pamphlets or whatever.
All right, so the individual is listening to the show, and one, you could say you could try to direct him to see if you can find a back issue of Pursuit magazine. That's a long time.
I just found them on eBay.
Okay.
I've got some great things I found in them, which I want to get to today if possible.
All right, and the other thing about this is because you don't have a lot of information about this. Do you know if these things were ever covered? I know this sounds crazy. In the mainstream news, like with a local newspaper in microfilm, perhaps have an article about this?
Yeah, and you just have to go back to the old literature. There were lots of things going on in Northern Virginia with UFOs. And I know that I remember reading about a radio, there was a radio station, disc jockey who just covered UFOs. That was all he did. And I can't remember the guy's name offhand, but you just have to go back and dig, really. But yeah, they did. They covered it much more then than they do now.
All right, so there's a chance if he can identify the date in 1968 that he might be able to go to his local archives, a library, whether it's academic with a college or whether it's perhaps a pub or even a newspaper itself, and go back and perhaps find that article. Because he's near, he says he's about 5 miles away, and he's compelled to want to find out more. So at least we address that, and go on with your train of thought.
Well, we found out that Haymarket was near Mount Weather, which is a secret base that Keel talked about, where a plane crashed into once. And then Sugar Grove's about 60 miles from there. And we talked about how Route 50 kind of connects all these things.
US 50, right.
Because Mount Weather is about 5 miles off Route 50 on Route something. What was the town that I'm Paris?
Paris, right.
And so if you follow 50 over, there's all kinds of things. Let me look at my map. There's
I think 50 was also
Rocket City.
Huh?
Rocket City, what is now Rocket City, Clarksburg, which is where Gray Barker was based. There's Elk Gardens, which is a big UFO sighting area. Romney, which is where Harriet says the second secret base was worked on by her father. Parkersburg, which is where the Indrid Cold, Woody Derenberger stuff happened. ETAM is right off it. ETAM is West Virginia, is where they had AT&T has its listening dishes. And so, and I guess Barker was chased on 50 by a MIB priest. May have been
MIB?
May have been dead. No, Ferry was dead by then. So we had other men in black.
Oh, I got you.
Posing as priests.
Would these be the wandering bishops by any chance?
Yeah, some kind of wandering bishop activity. But I have forgotten where I was going before that.
You're going down Route 50.
No, before that. I have forgotten.
Or resurrect something else.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, also, we had a listener that sent some photos with regard to the shape of the Union Carbide facility.
Yes.
That is indeed crown shaped, but you do want to, by way of we're doing errata, you want to clarify that it may not necessarily have been of the Swedish crown, but it certainly was monarchical in its design.
Yes, it really is,
and then you have the
it has the 8 points, which is very symbolic of infinity, and the 8th chakra, 8th tower, enlightenment. Royalty representing the gods.
So you want to clarify, if you don't, that's trying to find because I went to the insignia on the flag of Sweden. It is the national symbol, as far as I can tell. Their hockey team has it, the crest on their jerseys. But
I'll tell you where I got the idea was I looked at the Swedish Center here in Seattle, the building. I was driving by and I looked at it and I thought, wow, that looks just like the Carbide building because it was a stylized version of the crown.
You mean like a little schematic or something like that?
Yeah, it wasn't a photo of a crown.
Right.
It was someone had taken the symbol and simplified it and it just made it look like more like that Carbide building.
Well, we want to thank that individual also for sending that along. We appreciate it. And that, in fact, that was the facility in Connecticut.
Yeah, which they've sold, or they've moved on somewhere else.
Okay.
Apparently, now that since they merged with Dow. By the way, here's something I just thought of. I talked to a guy once who said he hacked into the Dow computers back in the 60s. He was a radical of some kind. He was at a men's retreat here actually up in Vancouver that I went to. And it's in a research forest. It was held in a research forest.
Would that be Vancouver, Washington, or Vancouver?
It would be a research forest. That was the building we were having our meetings in was dedicated by Monsanto. I remember everybody had to report in and talk about themselves. I remember saying, this Monsanto plaque reminds me of, all the things that happened back in my valley with all the chemical plants and stuff. And
was that Vancouver, Washington, Andrew, or Vancouver, BC?
Vancouver, BC.
Okay.
And so these guys started sort of coming out of the woodworks and talking to me about, things they'd done. And this guy, was pretty amazing. And he also, there was that guy, and there was a guy who said he had a bunch of strange things happen around Lake Louise in Canada. And then when I got these Pursuit magazines, I found a reference to some sightings at Lake Louise, some creature sightings.
That's one of the most beautiful spots in the world.
Yeah, and there was also a connection with the Doors. The drummer for the Doors was there. I didn't know it until later. Until the end when he sort of talked about his life. But we actually did a song together, believe it or not. I did a performance with the Doors.
Whoa.
Almost.
Light my fire, baby.
But he was a strange kind of guy, interesting guy. He said he has telepathic communication with Jim Morrison. and he's the guy who's written a book on Jim. I can't remember the name of it. Letters to Jim or something, but he writes letters to Jim still. Kind of an odd guy, and he's from Louisiana, and he told me how he saw his sister stab herself in the heart and kill herself.
Oh, my God.
That was like a defining moment in his life. You can imagine that, how horrible that would be.
That would ruin your day. Yep.
And yet he goes on to be, become a successful musician. Pretty amazing story. Well, I forgot. I remember where I was heading. I was heading to 60. When you were talking about going back and researching, one thing I've been doing is going back and watching cartoons from 66 and 67. I'm finding an amazing amount of this paranormal stuff coming out in the cartoons.
All right, now we got to be more specific here.
Yeah, well, I don't know that I want to be specific now because I might have all this stuff written down.
Well,
somewhere else in my list.
All right, well,
is it in here?
All right, let's just do this. First of all, because cartoons, it's the world of anything can happen, right? I mean, you can make anything do anything in cartoons.
My point is this.
Go ahead.
Did the cartoons influence people to have the sightings, or did the phenomenon cause the cartoonists to do the cartoons?
I would think that, not that you're asking me, but I'll tell you something else that I read today, if I could, that resonates with what you're saying. And that is probably the experience was had and shared and with a wink and a nod in the cartoons. What I read was somebody who was really, his underwear was too tight. Somebody who was saying that the movies that are made, like Armageddon, Independence Day, blah, 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 actually conjure or beget violence. And he was rapping him for that particular aspect. But what the guy missed was, and this also goes into 9/11, okay? This is a whole 9/11 connection. And this was sent to me by our listeners also. But what the guy missed was, and we've done this, that there's 9/11 images in all those movies. Yeah. Right? So he's not even dealing it with on that level. I can understand why. Not many would. But again, I think with what you're saying is, no, I think that this is known, this has been experienced, and it's being shared in that particular media for whatever purpose. In this case, it's cartoons. But can I ask you one thing now? I mean, can you give me...
I remember that guy. I remember looking at a website of all that subliminal 911 stuff before it happened.
Well, John Valentini from Australia is now doing a book. It's ready to come out as well. But he also slid me the images, which I put on my website, and I still got more to put up. And I only put up the ones that I think are really compelling. And there's others that I don't, only because I don't want to, if you will, cheapen the credibility, or if you want to say the connectivity to the ones which I think really defy explanation. So anyway, going back, the cartoons, that's another, I think, method of getting the story across. And can you give me an example, though, like of one of the events that might be in those cartoons?
What was it? It had to do with the Hulk. I sent somebody an email. Let me see if I can find it. Who was it? Oh, I remember now. It was the moderator of the Mothman list. Let me see. Okay, here it is.
Okay.
Episode 7, I think, from 1966, where there are humanoid robots who work for a mind-controlled doctor who implants a radio telemetric device in Hulk. And this is similar to the thing I talked about. And I was sending this email to the person whose name came up in the dream that I talked about last time. A woman on the list had a dream about these robotic humanoids.
Uh-huh.
And the name she gave it to it was the name of the moderator. Well, I guess I'll say his name, Frick. His name's Frick. She said they were called Fricks. Then I wrote Frick, and I said, told him about this episode from Hulk. And then there's also one of the witnesses I interviewed in the documentary had the same dream, but didn't connect the name Frick to it, but the same dream basically.
Huh.
He had an abduction experience. I interviewed him the day after, so it was connection to this abduction experience that he had that dream. And especially like in the Super Friends series, you see lots of, there's a guy named Darkseid who has a little remote pointer, clicky, that he can open a vortex wherever he wants, and then they jump through the vortex, get away from Superman or whoever.
Well, the reason I asked you about the cartoon,
he has a monk as his assistant, an evil Vatican monk kind of guy.
Did you throw Vatican?
His son looks like a Bigfoot.
What?
Yes, Darkseid's son doesn't look like him. He looks like kind of like a Bigfoot, a small Bigfoot, like the 3 or 4 foot tall ones that we saw, or that. My only memory of the night that we supposedly were attacked by or visited by Mothman, according to my friend Tommy, who told me that we had been visited, and I didn't remember a thing about it. I was asleep, but I do vaguely remember like 3 foot high. If I had to speculate on what was in the room, it would be that kind of thing, a hairy 3 foot thing, and those things appear all over the paranormal literature, those creatures, and the Cherokees called them the little people, although I think the Cherokees might have been even a little shorter. There's a whole thing in the Cherokee lore from North Carolina about them. Did you have a question? I heard you.
Yeah. First of all, I asked you about the cartoons, because I didn't know what kind of cartoons you were talking about, or whether they were comic strips or such, because I didn't know there was anything inherent, let's say, because I've not looked back at this in a long time, where the Looney Tunes was telling us something, with Daffy Duck and all them, or whether this was something more recent, and if you're saying the Hulk and stuff, we're looking at stuff in the late 60s, is that right?
Well, what I found was that in 66, 67, right when the Mothman was happening, and then again in 73, and then again in 77, 78, each time you had a big UFO flap, you had these cartoons that were echoing the same exact themes, and in some cases, they're the same cartoon. They resurrected them at that time. Like, they resurrected, I'm trying to think now, the Super Friends got resurrected in 73 and 77, and then another group in 81. There were some that were started in 66 and then they did another round in 81, like the Herculoids, which has a shape-shifting glob that reminiscent of the ball in the Prisoner show.
Wait, Hercules?
Herculoids.
Okay.
So there's this, and Keel, those are definite UFO flap years, and years that things happened in my life too. 73, the picture of the Mothman. By the way, I have a whole thing with that I'm ready to go into here in just a sec.
Well, I tell you what, you got about 5 minutes left, so.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, boy. Okay. Well,
so pick your spots.
Let's do it.
Do it.
And I'll just leave it to that. Okay. Well, October 16th, and I might have to revisit this later, but October 16th was my birthday, and it's a birthday I've been talking about with my friends a lot, because I was given an inkling that when I turned this 47, that some more Mothman things were going to happen, and that I needed to get my book, album, and movie done by then. And that was sort of always been a lifelong goal of mine, and I got it done. And then bingo, on that date, you had Bush signing the Military Commissions Act, or maybe it was the day after. But, I've been telling my friends, look out for some big event. And I think, in a way, you could say that was it. We have no longer any protection under the law.
Yeah.
On that date. And there's a bunch of other things that happened. Like I've said before, they all kind of happen in groups. One thing that happened on the same day was Loren Coleman posted a thing about his Bigfoot photo contest winner that he had a year ago, saying it was a 1-year anniversary. The winner is this guy, Eric Starn in Wayne, Pennsylvania, who took a picture of Mothman. And you look at the picture, and it's set up exactly like my picture of Mothman, with, not that mine was set up, but my picture of Mothman came out first. It came out 6 weeks before the guy was announced as the winner. And it's an obvious hoax on the part of this winner. You can see a human hand, a couple of hands. It looks like 2 kids kind of climbing in a window. Obviously set up to be a hoax. Yet it exactly mimics the layout of my photo. Thus, I think designed to discredit my photo, because everybody's going to see Lauren's picture first. I mean, that's what everyone's telling me. Everyone I've been saying, what is this? And they say, well, it looks like, this is going to, corrupt people's view of your picture, because they're going to know that this is an obvious hoax.
Can we assume that Lauren Coleman is somewhat of a detractor of yours, or what?
Well, yeah. I mean, he's definitely, completely. I gave him the information about 911, the connection to 911 5 years ago, and the connection to Bigfoot and the glowing spheres 5 years ago, which he also posted a thing recently, distancing himself further from the idea that there are Bigfoots with spheres, which is kind of unusual because in some cases he goes for a supernatural explanation when there's no other one available. If it's obvious that the government, it just seems like if it's obvious the government may be behind it, like in the case of cattle mutilations, which there's a lot of evidence that it's caused by mineral rights or oil companies and mineral companies are doing it to test for underground minerals. This came out in 1980. Coleman and his buddy Jerome Clark both took the position that it was supernatural, based on the testimony of a person who was known to be a liar, a huge liar in Minneapolis. They decided, and this is what their description of the guy, that he was known as a liar, pathological liar. They still accepted his testimony, and it doesn't make sense. And so this all came out of Pursuit magazine. It was one of the things I found in there. So if there's a government, if there's a possible conspiracy, it seems like they usually take the easiest route, which is to say there's no such creature, like Mothman. But in the case of a cattle mutilation, you can't say that there aren't cattle, and you can't say that these cattle aren't being mutilated. They are, and you can't say that it's natural because it's not. So then they take the supernatural explanation at that point.
At that point, it serves them right. Hey, listen, we got to jump. I'm going to ask you to stay with us, okay?
Yeah.
When I say to the audience that tomorrow we'll have on Andrew McGregor regarding the Port Arthur massacre, and stay tuned for that, okay? We thank you for listening to Grassy Knoll. We'll see you tomorrow.
Because we don't have elders, or we don't have teachers, we don't have gurus in this culture. We don't have somebody balls of light, alcohol, TV, balls of light. You know, we do a lot of drugs. We drink a lot of alcohol. Opiates focus that energy. Paranormal experiences.
So much Mothman activity.
Paranormal experiences. Balls of light. If you want to see them as angels, you'll see them as angels. If you want to see them as aliens, you'll see them as aliens. Watch TV. Yeah, it's energy. Round, purple balls of light. You know, we do a lot of drugs. Energy. Watch TV.
Balls of light.
Yoga or through meditation. Alcohol or TV. Yoga or through meditation, focus that energy. Yoga or through meditation, alcohol or TV. Yoga or through meditation, balls of light.
Part of a nationwide occult group.
Killing each other left and right.
So much Mothman activity.
Watch TV. Yeah, it's energy.
A nationwide occult group.
The battle of good and evil.
6 years after the Mothman.
Watch TV.
Balls of light. He pulled one of the key Mothman experiencers out of her. He tried to pull her into his car.
Paranormal experiences. Round purple balls of light.
So much Mothman activity.
Round purple energy. Balls of light. If you want to see them as angels, you'll see them as angels. If you want to see them as aliens, you'll see them as aliens. Focus that energy. The battle of good and evil. Paranormal experiences. The battle of good and evil. Watch TV.
Balls of light.
The most important question is whether you perceive the world as one of good or one of evil.